same step we should take. Today, we are going to be looking at the man Murtala Ramat Mohammed. I told you about him yesterday, and we talked about, this is February, and in a few days we'll be hitting 13th of February, and that's going to be the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Nigeria's head of state uh, in the early morning hours of that day, 13th of February 1976, while he was going to work. He was gunned down, and everybody celebrated him. Now his time became a saint. But we are going to come back to talk about Buka Sukadinka and his guys later on. But what we are saying, we want to look at Murtala. At what point Murtala Muhammad actually became a saint? Because the story we have about him and the history we have about him, and some from eyewitnesses' accounts, is that he was a very hot-headed and very uncompromising, uh, and sometimes, you know, very undisciplined persons felt that persons felt that uh, the killings did not go round. Only some sections of the country were aimed. Politicians and officers from section of the countries were killed. So some army officers were not happy about that, and that's why we had what they call the rematch or the revenge coup. And Murtala Mohammed was the overall leader of that rebellion. So we had other officers like Major Theophilus Danjuma and Captain Martins Adamu, but Murtala Mohammed then was a temporary lieutenant colonel, was the leader of that coup. And at the time he felt, I think he felt that he should have been the head of state and not Gowon, because Gowon was just like a bystander, and he came in to quell the situation. So the odds were against Murtala in 1966. But the same date, 9 years after, or was it 9 years after? Yeah, the same date, 9 years after, on July the 29th, 1975, the same men who toppled the Agui Ronsi government still toppled the Jerry Yakubu Gowon government again and brought in Murtala Mohammed as head of state. So we'll really discuss this man. Steve Aluko, you've had brushes with various military governments, particularly during your uh, tenure as the president of the student union government of the Ahmadu Bello University in there. So you always have brushes with the military. But now let's look at this man. I know then you must be a very, very young man. Well, let's look at him, Murtala Mohammed, and let's look at this point. From this point, at what time he actually became a saint? Because he never had a beautiful record before he became head of state. We have talked about the Asaba massacre and all that. Then the July 29 coup, how bloody it is. Some people felt that July 29 coup of 1966 is the bloodiest in the history of military takeover in African politics. All those records were not good ones at all. So but at what point, because he was celebrated a national hero following his demise.
Well, permit me to take it in two fronts. First on the moral standing, and then secondly on the spiritual standing. I would like to go spiritual first and foremost. That in a record of life, in record of living, there's room for restitution. No matter how bad someone is, the essence of salvation is to redeem that person. You will recall that even while Christ was on the cross, two thieves were by his side. One God saved, and one got his own destroyed for life. So it's very important that we bear that at the spiritual realm. And then you also come down to twofold. If you look at the book of Proverbs, chapter 6, verse 31, it says, when a thief is called, you will pay a sevenfold restitution. And then if you join that one to the book of Luke, chapter 19, verses 1 to 10, it talks about fourfold. Zacchaeus was talking at that point. Well, Jesus was passing through Jericho because he was very short like myself. He climbed the sycamore tree, and from there, Christ looked up and got him, ate with him, and at the end of the day, he got saved. He said something. He said, whosoever I've stolen from, return what? Fourfold restitution. So restitution is a spiritual mandate. Unfortunately, many religious stance are no longer preaching it. Restitution is key. And because we've thrown it out of our scripture, out of our religious obligation, and that's why we have all sorts of bad people even on the altars and also in the mosque and the rest of it. So we must establish that it's a spiritual obligation to anybody that ever live, because all have sinned and come short of his glory. And then coming to the moral standing, no matter what you say about Muritala Ramat Mohammed, he is an outstanding soldier. Either you like it or not, and it's a standing soldier. And just like you rightly said, all records point to one thing, that he is a principled man. Yes, at what point did he become saint? Well, he has the tendency. He had the conscience right from his upbringing as a military man, and some people that also wrote about his personal private life. And then coming to when, you see, even if you look at the historical materialism and dialectic theories of the Marxists and the Hegelian theory, it also provides for class contradiction. I would say that the class contradictions through of Muritala, he got enlisted into the army when others were denied. And then because of what he believes in, he stands clearly. And like you rightly said, the coup was strictly Muritala's coup. But because as of that time, the British armed forces and other paramilitary, there's what they call a lawful order and what they call an unlawful order. If you look at where he has his disagreement, is areas where he felt that the issues were not patriotic enough, were not nationalistic enough. Years before he became saint, he's part of the soldier that looted the southeast. That we must tell ourselves. And there is no soldier of his their own time that was not involved in it in terms of war. And if you look at proceed the academic environment to this issue, you will go and read the book written by Festus Yayi, the former ASU chairman, on the maggot. He talks about the whole thing about the civil war, the class dimension, the evil that different people play at every time. And he talks about army of occupation. So as of that time, Muritala among his cohorts were behaving like a army of occupation. Who are the armies of occupation? They go into whatever space they find themselves, dominate the space, kill, destroy, maim, and also take advantage and explore all the resource that was in that place. The issue of the robbery of the bank is there. Himself and other soldiers were involved. And then if you also look at this other book written by Professor Bolaji Akiyemi about the soldiers of fortune, if you get that book, you skills for it. And then if you also read this book written by late Professor Abubakar Momo on about Nigerian military and the crisis of democratic transition, you will come out clear that you either have a nationalistic military or the one that is subservient. Like I said earlier on, Muritala was denied the opportunity of becoming the head of state after leading the coup because the British didn't want him. So they brought in a Gowon, a supposed Christian as of that
As a
time.
matter of fact, on the evening of July 29, 1966, after the coup had become an absolute success, northern troops were beginning to get their families ready and sending them back to the north, because the original aim of the coup was to secede from Nigeria. That's why it was termed Araba. And the Araba riot started in May, on the 29th of May 1966 in Kaduna, where thousands of people were killed. But the British now came in at the last minute, and the American Council in Lagos. What you wanted was success, and you have absolute success. Why not take over the whole country rather than going your way? I think that was where Gowon had to come in.
Exactly.
Because he was, I think himself and Mohammed Shua were the most senior military officers from the north alive at the time. They were both lieutenant colonels. But Gowon was a higher lieutenant colonel than Mohammed Shua. And I think that was where Murtala Mohammed lost out.
Exactly.
Because he was one of the newest lieutenant colonel then. I think he was a temporary lieutenant colonel. He was a temporary lieutenant colonel, not even uh, substantive. you know. But the bottom line now is the February coup of 1976, because that is where all this discussion is heading to.
Mhm.
A young lieutenant colonel from the Nigerian Army Physical Education Corps, Lieutenant Colonel Buka Suka Dinka, in the early hours of that morning, alongside Lieutenant William Seri, Lieutenant Peter Sigari, and Major Rabu, decided to ambush the head of state and rain bullets on him while he was going to work. And Murtala himself was, I don't understand what sort of, should I call that an arrogant confidence? He was walking, going everywhere without bodyguards, without nothing.
Well, I think we must understand where it's come. Like I said earlier on, he was among part of our disciplined soldiers. And unfortunately, when he was dribbled out of the presidency, so when the option of having him back came, he turned a new leaf. And from his first statement, it was very glaring that he's taking a different departure from where they used to
He
stand.
even returned 5 million naira back to government.
Exactly,
That was money, some part of the money he stole.
exactly. And that
He returned the
was
money back to government.
so immediately he announced that he's returning the money they looted in the bank, that other people felt threatened. That's one. Secondly, he moved on to making an outstanding statement in 1976. Africa has come of age. People must get that statement and read it. That was where he stood against the America.
Yes.
America wanted support for, I think, for the UNITA rebel or so. And he stood up, that UNITA rebel or the MPLA, I'm mixing it up now. He stood up to address the whole African head of state and say, look, Africa has come of age and we must not allow outsider to defend or set agenda for us. And the vote against US was taken and US was defeated.
As a matter of fact, the United States saw Nigeria as as a, as as a future world power.
Absolutely.
As at that time, if Nigeria talk, the United States of America keep quiet and listen.
Exactly.
That is how powerful we were then. That's why there is school of thoughts and pundits, particularly political analysts, believe that part of our present problem that the fought so the way they call 1976. It's a record that Nigeria was one of the richest nations in the world was at that time, and it posed a great threat to particularly these Western countries like the Great Britain and the United States of America. So I don't really understand, but I think that that fear of having greatness from Africa, has always been there, particularly to nations like Great Britain and the United States.
Exactly. So these two major factors was a radical departure from who we used to be and the rest of it.
Okay.
A refund of stolen wealth. So other people felt, other corrupt army officers and politicians felt this guy is taking the war against corruption in either dimension. There was no undue military presence wherever he goes. There are instances where he disguises himself to go to places to make sure that
Exactly.
there's enforcement of discipline and the rest of it. So these were the things that really turned him around. I take it as his own form of a moral restitution. And that is where Nigeria must learn. We must learn to restitute where we are wrong at different levels. So at that departure, he stand out clear. Until date, he's still being celebrated as one of the best Nigerian leader and as one of the very best African head of state that ever came out of the continent.
Well, even with the fact that he ruled for only 6 months,
Yeah.
I don't know why he's always like this. When John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas, on the 22nd of November 1963, from that to date, if you look at historians' analysis on the best president in the United States history, you find him coming all the time at number one, between number one and number three. But he only ruled the US for 2 years and I think 9 months or so. You know, though there were a lot of innovations, a lot of transformation he brought in, so that's understandable. And for Murtala Mohammed, he was working. Work was in progress, and a lot of things were happening with the light of with the speed of light. You know, and all of a sudden, some people felt that he was not great enough. On tomorrow, we are going to play. We are going to look at those young men who decided to take over government by force on the 13th of February 1976, and we'll play the original coup speech of Lieutenant Colonel Bukar Suka Dinka. We'll play it tomorrow, and from then we'll continue with the analysis. Before I come back to Steve Aluko so that we continue our discussions, let's let you know that on national events today, on the 10th of February 2006, Beko Ransom Kuti died of lungs cancer. We'll talk about him. And also on the 11th of February 1982, Pope John Paul II visited Nigeria for the first time. Pope John Paul II visited Nigeria for the first time. And he succeeded the last Italian Pope, Pope John Paul I, Albino Luciani, who died in 1978 in a highly mysterious circumstance after serving as Pope for only 1 month. So Pope John Paul II became a Pope, and he was not an Italian Pope. And from then till now, we've not had an Italian Pope to this very moment. We'll talk about him, and we'll talk about that visit to Nigeria. Also, on the 14th of February, on Valentine's Day in 1950, Queen Elizabeth II visited Nigeria. That was 4 years before Nigeria's independence. The Queen's visit was in Kaduna State, where she was received by a large crowd of horsemen and leaders of various tribes and different provinces of northern Nigeria. The provincial leaders came from Ilorin, Kaba, Benue, Niger, Zaria, Katsina, Adamawa, Bauchi, Kano, Borno, Sokoto, and Jos. She was entertained with dances by different tribes dressed in their traditional costumes and attires. She was also in Port Harcourt, but her final destination in Nigeria was the ancient city of Kano, where many traveled miles to see her. In the end, it was indeed a remarkable visit for the Queen and the people of Nigeria. Comrade Luko, here we are at it again. They say they loved us so much that they always came to assist us. But history has shown and findings have shown that they were getting some things from our land in return.
They were not just getting something, they got everything. Whatever is made of Britain today is part of the plundering of our resources in Africa. And Nigeria being a major black population. Either you like it or not. Look at recently, which of the universities just returned about 116 artifacts that was stolen from the Benin Kingdom. And then in terms of slavery and other, the building of Buckingham Palace and the rest of it, the blacks, the exportation, dependency on export way of cash crop, and it also have to do. The construction of every infrastructure that time was to their own advantage.
As a matter of fact, I felt terrible to know that the war against the Napoleonic Kingdom in France, fought by Great Britain in the 1780s, led by William Pitt the Younger, that majority of the funds, over 400 million pounds, that were used in that war was gotten from Africa.
Absolutely. Apart from that, even people that fought, that really fought the war, a great number of them were from Africa. People that went to other wars, First World War, Second World War, some of them were granted and conscripted from African and then that's why you have Liberia today. It's part of the people that fought war at different time for either the Western powers and the rest of it. So we must understand this the center of ferry and then ferry, the relationship. We must get it clear. And this is why Nigerians and Africa must read the colonial African history. Africa was developing at its own pace before the interruption of the colonial master in whatever clan you call it. And up to today,
it was only in Ethiopia that they made a brick wall.
Exactly.
When the Italians tried to invade Ethiopia, to take over the Ethiopian kingdom, Ethiopia seized them, made Italians slaves in Ethiopia. Italians were slaves in Ethiopia. I think that was the only place that Europe could not really infiltrate.
Exactly.
But they infiltrated every other place,
Every other
even
place.
including the Kingdom of Egypt,
E-
were
e-
infiltrated.
Even the mapping of Africa that is bigger than some of their own continent, it was their own design. That's not the real map of Africa, but they taught us to believe it. And then you come to Nigeria, the amalgamation was created for their own interests. And up to today, we must say that we only have cosmetic independence, not real independence in the whole sense of it. So now they played policies and program
They made the
economic
north,
politically.
they made the north look so big, so wide on the map.
Up till now,
No, when in reality, it's not like that.
that's part of the
And
contradictions.
that was why the Prime Minister of the Federation, Alhaji Abdulkadir Balewa, rejected the census figure in 1962. He brought experts from Britain to conduct the census. When the census was conducted, he rejected it. He said, no, there is no way that the South can be more populated than the North. He now sacked the same people he employed and brought in his own people, different set of people to manipulate the census figure. And that was one of our earliest problems. The number to call is 08064641536. This is your time to make your contribution. And please, for those of you who are students of history, we believe there are things we don't know that you know. Please enlighten us.